Today we're here in the woods of Cumberland, Rhode Island. We are located directly behind what is known as the Monastery, which is currently the Hyde Library in Cumberland, Rhode Island. We're going to take a look at the oldest veteran monument which currently resides here in the United States. It's a place called Nine Men's Misery. We're approaching it right now. It's in the woods. It's a little bit difficult to find. There wasn't any kind of signage directing us to it. However, it has a very distinctive shape, and once I came upon it, we knew exactly that we had found it. So a little bit of the backstory. Nine Men's Misery is a monument in honor of men who were slain during what was known as King Philip's War. This war took place in 1675 and 1676. King Philip wasn't King Philip of Spain or any other European monarch. This wasn't a prelude to the French and Indian War. King Philip, in fact, was a name that was somewhat mockingly given to a Native American leader, basically a liar. He was not a liar, but an individual who forged alliances between all of the many local Indian tribes. He's better known by the name Metacom, Pomedicom, but the English refer to him as King Philip. Simply, perhaps there was a mocking tone associated with this. So what was going on at the time was the colonists had formed the Plymouth colony, and they had begun to expand. They were expanding into Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. And as they expanded, of course, they pushed back the Indians who were residing there, the Native Americans who were residing there. So their tensions were growing. The Indians survived by simply trading with the colonists. As long as they had goods to trade, they could retain their alliance with the English. However, this wasn't an agreement that could last forever. That this was simply a powder keg that was going to explode at some point in time. And essentially what did it was an individual, King Philip, Metacom, who was the father of one of the two Native Americans who befriended the Pilgrims, who formed the Plymouth colony. He was the son of Massasoit. Squanto and Massasoit were the two Indian leaders who befriended the Pilgrims. We'll take a look at the woods surrounding Nine Men's Misery. And as the son, he carried quite a bit of political weight, but he was extremely distrustful of the English. And in fact, after his brother died, his brother became head of the tribe, Sossaman, so to speak. And then when his father died, he was simply left with his own feelings of anger and of distrust of the white man. He openly hated the presence of the white men on the continent. The white man not only took the land, but they brought disease, smallpox, spotted fever, typhoid, and measles with him, and those diseases just decimated the Indians. So it was something that really just ate away at the Indian conscience, the Native American conscience. Metacom became sachem of at least two tribes in 1662 after his brother had passed away. And at that point he had the political power to act as a unifier among the tribes. He openly negotiated with other Native Americans to fight the interests of the colonists, to fight the interests of the Plymouth colony and the English. As their trading goods dwindled, the tensions rose, and armed skirmishes were inevitable. But the real spark of King Philip's War was the murder of a man named John Sossaman. He was a Native American. He converted to Christianity. He spoke with both King Philip and also the English at the same time. And perhaps he was even a bit of a traitor. He warned the Plymouth colony officials that Philip, or Metacom, however we're going to refer to him, that he was trying to unite the tribes against the English. And in doing so, the English immediately mobilized. They started to mobilize their forces. Sossaman was actually killed by his own kind. He was killed by fellow Indians. He was killed, and then his body was thrown into a pond that had frozen over, so his body wouldn't be found, but he was. Plymouth colony actually, they caught the men who killed John Sossaman, and they hung them. And this was the spark for the essentially the outrage. This was the spark for the call to arms, the fact that they would violate their sovereignty by arresting their own kind and hanging them. That was what set off Metacom and the King Philip's War. So in the winter of 1675, the attacks began. And they were limited at first to frontier areas, Maine, Rhode Island. But by the end of the winter of 1675, towns of Andover, Groton, Medford, Portland, Chelmsford, Marlborough, Providence, Sudbury, Seekonk, Warwick, Wrentham, they had all suffered attacks at the hands of Metacom's Indian Native American forces. So our story begins actually in the spring of 1676, when the Native American tribes began their attacks into Rhode Island towards Providence. Providence would eventually be burned by the Native Americans at one point in 1676. So as the Indian tribes continued to mobilize and to attack and run and cause severe, damage to local townships, to frontier towns, and as they grew in strength and marched towards the city, a English officer, Captain Michael Pierce of the Plymouth colony, he led a total of 60 Massachusetts soldiers and 20 what were known as praying Indians or Christianized Indians into Rhode Island to stop the tribes of the Narragansett Indians. Narragansett, the only recognized Indians in Native. I keep saying Indians. The only recognized Native Americans, Native American group in Rhode Island. So Pierce actually pinned down the group, but he walked himself into an ambush. So he was successful in finding where these Native American soldiers were, but he was unsuccessful in actually defeating them. His troops were slaughtered, and they turned the ones that did survive the initial attack turned and ran, and the last 10 were effectively captured by the Native American warriors. Now, when Native Americans are drawn into combat, the most important aspect of battle is to retain a trophy, and this would pop up again in the French and Indian or 7 Years' War, where Native Americans were promised those trophies, those scalps, in exchange for their allying with the French. And when they were denied that through there were standard honors of war that the English and the French stood for. When they were denied that, that's when alliances broke down. So these honors of war, the scalping of soldiers, these are all value trinkets, not saying trinkets, but valued honorable emblems, trophies, I should say, for the Indians. And so these 10 poor men who were captured were subjected to the knife of the Indian. Now, the monument here is called Nine Men's Misery. One of the individuals either was allowed to escape by his Indian captors, or he escaped on his own. That is lost to history. But the 9 men who were put under the knife, there are conflicting reports as to how they died. The monument simply reads that this is the spot where the 9 men were put to death on March 26, 1676. This particular placard was put up in 1928 by the monks who lived in the monastery right behind us here. Now, the death of these men was extremely brutal. There's 2 conflicting accounts. One, that a huge pyre was set up. It was a war dance, and that the men were skinned alive and hung until they died, hung upside down and just allowed to bleed to death. They were beheaded and their heads were stuck on poles, as was the custom of many Indian tribes. But what's more likely it happened, and there's more of a record on this, is that they were simply scalped. They were tomahawked, and their bodies were left behind in a huge pile. This stone encasement here that you see here, this is where this grouping of men were buried. The stones were put in place over time. They weren't this monument wasn't erected right away. When the English found out about this, they were able to recover the men, and they buried them, gave them a proper burial at the point at which they were found. But these stones were erected well after that. You can see that there's even signs of possibly even being cemented here. So this little makeshift grave here was put in place over an amount of time. As I mentioned, this is the oldest veterans memorial in the United States. In 1790, there's a little bit of controversy. Dr. Bowen was looking for a particular soldier, was looking for the fate of a man named Benjamin Buckland, and he was given consent to actually dig up the bodies and look for this individual. After that time, the monks who lived in the monastery decided that it was time to give these men a proper burial and give them a proper monument. So they actually enclosed this entire area. You see the stone wall here surrounding it. The monks of the monastery actually were responsible for building that around Nine Men's Misery. You can't really see it going downhill, but definitely you can see it going in this direction over here. Well, King Philip's War did not end very well. 3 days after Pierce's fight, his loss of life, Providence was burned by the Narragansetts. Springfield, Massachusetts was also partially burned. But the superiority and the resources of the colonists at the time was just too much for the Indians to keep the war going together. English consolidated their power in larger towns. They fortified, they were resupplied by sea, and there was a slow attrition in the alliance. The alliance just could not sustain itself over time. The Mohegans and the Pequods are actually two of the tribes that had allied with King Philip. You can see somebody here was camping. They broke away and they actually turned against them. The Mohawks used the opportunity to actually peck away at some of King Philip's tribe's lands by outwardly attacking them. And the colonists themselves organized themselves into very small warring bands, marauding parties, supply destroying parties, basically turned the tactics of the Indians against them. And one of the more famous battles, Captain Turner defeated a party along the Connecticut River, was one of the major supply lines, although Turner himself was killed. Philip was ultimately cornered just outside of Providence in August 12, 1676, so just a few months after Nine Men's Misery. And he ultimately was killed, beheaded. His body was drawn and quartered. His head was put on a pole, and he was displayed in Plymouth Colony for 20 years. So things did not turn out very well for the Indians, but it was the first outward rebellion and the first signs that the Indians could play a military role in what was going to be decided on the North American continent. Indians were looked to the French at one point for help, but it just wasn't to come. However, there was a very strong alliance during the 7 Years' War, which would happen some 70 years later in the 1740s and 1750s, the prelude to the American Revolution. So Nine Men's Misery stands as one of the most significant battles of the King Philip's War, a testament to the tenacity and the brutality that the Native Americans inflicted upon the colonists in retaliation to the colonial expansion, the spreading of disease, and the callousness and arrogance of the colonists as they explored what they believed was their newly found land. And it was a collision of cultures that ultimately was not going to be able to survive. So I'll turn it off here, and we'll take a look back and take you through what is known as the Monastery, a slightly paranormal area that has a rather interesting history.